Our reading today comes from Mark chapter 1, and verses 21 to 28. And here it comes.
Jesus and his followers went to Capernaum. When the Sabbath came, Jesus went straight to the synagogue and started teaching. People were astonished by the way he spoke. Unlike the scribes, he taught them with authority. They listened carefully and wanted to hear more. Suddenly, a man in the synagogue, filled with an unclean spirit, shouted angrily, "What do you want for us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are. You are the Holy One of God." The crowd was shocked, but Jesus didn't hesitate. Straight away he turned to the man. "Be quiet and get out of him," he commanded. The man fell to the floor, shaking and sobbing. Then a huge cry came out of him, and the unclean spirit was gone. Everybody was amazed. They turned to each other excitedly and said, "What is this? He teaches us in a new way with authority. He even has powers over unclean spirits." And from that moment on, Jesus' fame spread across Galilee.
Roots has a title for this week's reading entitled Making an Impression. So, what kind of impression? When we look back at our lives, we recall those who've made an impression upon us, some for good, some for ill. When we look at the world around us, we see people who make an impression, but not always for the better. The big question is, who are we willing to listen to? And who are we prepared to follow? Who is going to make a lasting impression on our lives and influence us for the better? This story from Mark is the first account of Jesus beginning his preaching and teaching ministry. But why should people listen to what he had to say? Why do they still listen? Why do we still listen 2,000 years later? The people in that synagogue were astonished by what he had to say. They talked about preaching with authority. Not really sure what they meant by authority, but they were certain that they knew that it was different to the authority of the scribes, who thought themselves above the common people because they felt they had the power to interpret and regulate the law. It seems to me that the authority Jesus showed was one that could change and alter people's lives and alter their relationship with God and with others in ways the law never could. That view was emphasized by what happened when he was interrupted, just as his audience was captivated by what he had to say, interrupted by a disturbed man who started shouting. Jesus stopped the man, got him to be quiet and calm. In those days, people talked about a man being possessed. Whatever happened, the man was changed. No longer taunted by the troubles that haunted him. No wonder the audience commented that he teaches us in a new way. The gospel writers tell many stories of Jesus being interrupted when teaching, and which led him to acts of healing. It often got him into trouble, especially when he did it on the Sabbath day. The scribes wouldn't like that, for they taught that keeping the law, rather than dispensing love, care and compassion, were what counted. So these people saw him as a challenge to their privileged position, and they sought to get rid of him. The story reminds me that actions so often speak louder than words. We don't know what Jesus said, but we certainly know what he did. It also reminds me that we need in our teaching and speaking to stick to the maxim, do as I do, rather than do as I say. There's no point in preaching one message and then going off to Barnard Castle to get an eye test. Earlier we watched the story of Malala and the Telegraph's contrast between Greta and Mr. Trump. I mentioned more than once how impressed I've been by Malala in her fight for girls' education and Greta for her fight on climate change. I remember Malala being determined to go to school when clearly she had been threatened because she believed passionately that she should act out what she believed, even if it cost her life, which it very nearly did. Greta sailed across the Atlantic to attend a conference because she didn't want people to suggest that whilst we need to think about our carbon footprint, she didn't, however good the cause. In their lives, they've both sought to live out the message they seek to deliver. It's also important to note that their message is about changing the world for the benefit of all. It's a transformative message of hope and love. Regrettably, we live in a world of fake news and false messages. I'm very grateful for the fact that I've had my COVID vaccine. It hasn't turned me into an alien or whatever. I'm no more weird now than I was before. Yet some people have been put off by messages they read or stories they are told or strange YouTube channels they visited. But don't let this fake news put you off seeking for the truth. Our Godly Place story on the well takes us back to those most important issues of thirsting after that which is right and true. Isaiah once said, "Come all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labour on that which does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear, and come to me. Listen, that you may live." We need to search for the truth. Jesus said to some of his followers, "If you hold my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So it continues to be important for us to listen and to learn, whether we're young or old or in between. How many people visited that well but never thought about how they could access the life-giving water? How many of us fail to take time to listen and learn what God has to say to us and what he has to teach us? We asked the young people to reflect on the people they felt had authority, people they were willing to listen to. As a teacher, I've always felt the burden of responsibility to try and set a good example. I didn't want to ask pupils to do something that I wasn't prepared to do myself. I didn't want one rule for them and another for me. I wanted mutual respect. But it was also very aware that I had responsibilities towards the children who I taught. Being a parent or grandparent is also never an easy task because we're there to set an example. Being a follower of Jesus is never easy because it means living out that message of love and hope. What we say should always be matched by what we do. Back to the story. It set Jesus on the trail of setting an example, and that example was very clear. It was based on those two strands of loving God and loving others. He provided for us a role model of how he expects us to behave. It begins with listening to what God has to say to us, and it rapidly moves into action. For our actions will be what people judge us by. Then perhaps they'll listen to our story and God's story. And maybe like that man in the synagogue, we will feel our lives change, and hopefully we will help others to experience the life-changing experience that meeting with Jesus can bring into all our lives. This isn't fake news, and this isn't any news. This is the good news of Jesus Christ. It changes and transforms.